Hi everyone! Today, in my first ever tutorial, I'm going to be showing you how to cast on, knit and cast off so that you end up with a sweet little rectangle like mine. For this little rectangle, you're going to need a pair of scissors, some knitting needles, I use 4mm but 5 will also work, and some 8-ply acrylic yarn. You can use wool as well, but I'm allergic so I use acrylic. So to start, pop your scissors out of the way, you won't need those until the end. Grab your yarn and take the end of the yarn. So to start us off, we need to make a slip knot. So take the end of the yarn in one hand, loop it around the finger on your other hand and twist, pop your thumb through and grab the long tail and pull it through. And then you'll see that you end up with a nice little hoop. So one more time. Take the end of the yarn, loop it around the finger, twist, put your thumb through and grab the long end of the yarn and pull it through. And you have a slip knot. So now that we have this, we can cast onto our knitting needles. So pick up your first needle and pop it through the hoop and pull the long tail of the yarn to bring it tighter to the needle. You don't want this to be too close to that first needle though, so making sure you're using the short tail to pull and loosen, the long tail to pull and tighten, and just making sure that you're left with a hoop you can fit both knitting needles through at the end. Also, making sure the short tail is at the back of that knitting needle so that it doesn't get caught up in your work when you come to knitting. And then we want to add more hoops, so take the long end, twist it around the finger, and pop the needle through and pull, keeping about the same sort of tension as you did for the slip knot originally, whilst you're pulling these loops on. So again, twist it around your finger, pop it onto the knitting needle and pull. And we're going to do this a total of 8 times to get the little rectangle that I showed you at the start. There we go, so count that you've got 8. And make sure they're all roughly the same tension on the needle. Then we can start knitting. So you want to push these loops up to the top of the first needle, making sure you can hold them all securely in that hand, and then pick up your second needle, and you want to push this needle through the back of the first loop and first needle. So making sure it's at the back, grab your yarn, bring it up and around over the top of that back needle. So up and around over the top of the back needle, and then push the back needle through to the front and use both hands to ease it off of the top of the first needle and onto the second. So making sure those two loops are close together, if you pull them, you're going to end up with a tail in the middle. And this is going to affect the whole way that you knit. As you can see, it's trickier to get the needles through the loops, and you're going to keep getting a longer and longer tail each time you go. So starting again, and we'll redo those loops, bringing us back to 8. So the second needle through the back of the first needle, bring your yarn up behind and over the top of the second needle, and use both fingers to push it over onto the second. Whilst we're doing this, we're also making sure that the long tail end of the yarn is also at the back of that second needle, and this just keeps everything nice and uniform and tidy. Another couple of handy tips is how I use my hands with the yarn. So I use these 2 fingers to hold the yarn, these 3 to support the needle, and make sure that I keep a nice even tension. So if you pull the yarn too tight, it's going to be really hard to get your knitting needles through those loops, and if you have it too loose you're going to end up in tangles. So you want to keep a really nice even tension on this yarn here, and we're more just guiding as opposed to holding, and then using the other 3 fingers to put the yarn around the needle and to handle the needle. And with the other hand, I use this finger here to help support that second needle and guide it over to the top of the first one, making sure it's going where we want it to, and to push those loops over the end of the first needle. So the way we use our hands is really important because it just helps us to really guide the yarn and the needles into the positions they need to be, keep the correct tension on that yarn, and make sure we have a really good finished product at the end of our project. So last stitch, and we have finished our first row of knitting. So pulling that short tail through, make sure that it's not gathered in amongst your loops, otherwise it's going to be a bit messy, and checking that you've got the right tension, those hoops are all the same sort of size, and then push the loops up to the top of your knitting needle and continue with knitting on this row exactly the same as you did on the first row. And as you can see, the loops aren't pulling and making tails in between the loops anymore, but still trying to keep that same tension on the long end of the yarn and still using the other hand to just guide the needle through the loops. Now that we've done our cast on and 2 rows of knitting, you're going to do 5 more rows of knitting. So I'm going to fast forward, feel free to pause here and play again when you're finished. And here we go. So now you can see we have most of this rectangle finished. We have so far done 8 rows of cast on and knit. So both the tails are at the same end of the rectangle at this point. We want to make sure that is the case with yours. Push all those loops up and we're going to knit the 9th row. So this row is exactly the same as you have been, making sure that you're keeping the nice even tension with one hand on the long end of the yarn, making sure you're using the finger on the second hand to guide that needle through, and making sure that the long tail end of the yarn is at the back of your loops. And then we're going to cast off. So pushing those loops back to the end as we have been so far the whole time, bringing that long tail end out of the way, making sure it's at the back, and push your second needle through the back of the first needle, bring the yarn around over the top of the back, push it through, exactly the same as we have done a knit, but this time we're just going to do 2, and then we're going to stop. So we have 2 loops on this second needle. We're going to put the first needle through the back loop on the second needle, bring it over the top of the first, and pull it off and over so that we end up with just 1 loop on the second needle. The first one is behind as it's being cast off. So again, through the back, just doing a normal knit, 2 loops on the second needle, bring the first needle through the back loop on the second needle and pull it over the top and off. So we have 2 knits cast off and 1 left on the second needle. You'll also need to know here that at this point we're holding it looser in this hand. So we want to have nice loose loops on this 1 knitting needle now. As you can see, it's looser on that end too. We still don't have a tail in the middle, but it's still a nice loose loop. And this is just going to ensure that we have nice parallel rectangle and that both of the long sides of the rectangle are the same length when we finish. So again, nice and loose here, you'll end up with a nice loose hoop. It also makes it easier to bring it over that second loop on the knitting needle. And you can pull it looser and tighter as you need to. So if you do pull it too loose, you can pull it tight again. If a needle falls out because it's loose, you can just pop it straight back through. So don't panic. Panicking is going to make it worse. So again, nice and loose with this second hand, bring it over the top and do another knit, pop it through the back loop on the needle and over the front and pull it off, leaving nice loose loops. And you're going to do this until you get to the end. So here we are now at the end of cast off with just 1 loop left on our needle. Pull that through, make a nice big loop, and we can put both of our needles aside and then stretch out the end of your rectangle there just to make sure that it is definitely parallel and a nice even line. And then we're going to flip it over and we're going to cut the excess yarn off now. So snip that away, pop your fingers through the loop, grab the tail and pull through and just pull it nice and tight. Use the other hand as well, just make sure that slack is gone. You don't want to have any or it's going to unravel. So nice and tight, nice and rectangular, and there you go. So they're just make sure both the knots are tight actually, that one as well, and then snip those off. There we go. So there you go everyone, that is how you end up with a nice rectangle, same as the one that I showed you at the beginning of the video. And these little rectangles are what I use to make my bow hair clips on my online store. So I can make tutorials later to finish off a nice little bow for you, and you can see how you end up with the finished product. But I hope you really enjoyed this tutorial. Please like this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you did, and you'll see more tutorials and products from me. Love and teddy bear hugs, and I'll see you then.